All right, so my name is Gervais, but Jay. I was in the Navy for many years, and they called me Gervais too many times, so I had to come up with a nickname, so Jay was it. So today I want to talk about, I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to zoom through this stuff really quick so we can get to questions and stuff, but I'm going to talk about my experience. First of all, you know, I work for a company. I worked for NASA for many years. I worked for IBM for many years. I retired from IBM as part of the DevOps and Agile practices and GBS, and worked with a lot of financial institutions. So Kaiser is kind of very similar to that, is that when we started this whole notion about DevOps and Agile, started talking to companies, you know, 15, 20 years ago, they thought we were crazy. That there's no way that we were going to do any of this stuff. Nowadays, if you're not doing it, you're crazy. So I'm going to take us through that journey today and talk about some companies that I think are very successful about this. And Gene Kim has talked about this, and Jess, so anyone knows Gene Kim and Jez Humble and all those people, right? Cool. And DevOps Handbook and all that cool stuff, right? So there's a lot of now real data out there that supports that if you do this and you do it well, you're going to beat your competition and the business is going to be successful, right? And so first of all, I like to say that, you know, there's a lot of data out there, so there's a shift, and there's, you know, 80% of global 1,000 companies will be doing this by 2019. I think we're ahead of that now. Companies are, you know, like I said before, if you're not doing this, you know, everyone else in the world thinks that you're a Neanderthal, right? So I just want to point that out, that we're in a hyper cycle and everyone's doing this. This is the typical DevOps world. Are you DevOps engineers? You probably recognize this junk, right? Of course, there's a lot more complexity behind all this stuff. So this is for the executives. You know, you can talk to them and say, okay, here's the cool stuff you got to do, and here's how it all relates, right? So, and here's the value statement that we use a lot with senior executives and companies, and we really focus on what? What's the number one thing every company wants and they expect DevOps to do it? Yeah, speed of delivery. We're gonna move everything quicker. We're gonna get it out there quicker. We're gonna make the customers more happier, faster, and not only that, but it's gonna be the highest quality of code ever, right? And who's responsible for doing that? Yeah, the DevOps engineers, right? So this is what we kind of go through from when we talk to engineers, and of course when we talk to CEOs and CFOs and everything, we have to translate this to their language, right? We also talk about reducing waste. So how many people know about value stream mapping and all that stuff? But we generally come in with organizations and say, well, it takes you 10 days or 5 days to push your code. Would it be cool if you can do it in a half an hour? Right. Oh, anyone pushes their code in half an hour here? Probably not. So, you know, it's a goal, right? But if we get it down to several days to, you know, a couple hours, that's fantastic, right? That's amazing. You know, we've never been able to do that. I've been in the business for 30-something years. I started coding in assembler and on mainframes, right? And we could never do that, right? The other thing we do is that, in my opinion, DevOps does not work without Agile teams. Do y'all agree with that? I mean, if you can't change the company and the organization and the team structure so that everyone works, whether you use Scrum or Kanban or whatever, if everyone doesn't work in an iterative and incremental fashion, and if the team is not cross-functional, and if the organization is not aligned for that to happen, then DevOps that's not going to work. You're not going to get the results. So I'm getting a lot of heads shaking. All right, cool. So this is what we typically do: is we come into organizations and we say, oh, we got to change the organization. And what's the first thing senior executives say? Heck no, my organization's fine. What are you talking about? Right? So we have to go through that whole process of why it's not fine, and we got to change it. And then we talk about a lot of different steps in the process, right? So we talk about, we look at their infrastructure and their organization, and we talk a lot about release and deployment. But what is generally the first thing we do when we talk about DevOps? And if we're going to introduce DevOps to an organization, what's generally the first part of the DevOps tool chain or the cycle that we look at? Yeah, and software configuration management, right? So how many of you do your coding and everything goes to the main and there's no branching? Well, I always ask that when I go into companies and they look at me like I'm from Mars. And I go, of course we have branching. And I say, why? Why? You should be putting everything in the main, right? And reduce your branching. Your branching should be very temporary. And so that's the first thing we start, because if I don't have a good code management system and a good set of tools and people to do that, then all the deployment in the world is not going to help me. All right. Version control. How many of you all here use feature flags? Yeah. So there's several companies, I won't mention of them. One in the South Bay starts with a G, but they changed their name with an A. They have a whole team that's all they do is manage feature flags. But it's important. It's very important to determine how you're going to do the versioning, right? And it's very important because there's many shops who have struggles with how to version the code because of what the gentleman said about Kaiser and other banks that I've worked at before, and financial institutions. They have different versions depending on the software, language, and then the environment that it's in, and it gets very complicated very quickly, right? And branching. So that's why I like to get rid of branching as fast as I can, because that just complicates versioning. This is generally what we see. We see that, as a sales cycle, that we want to talk about, what's the end result of DevOps? Am I going to reduce, budget by 70%? Am I going to improve customer experience? Am I going to reduce failure of my projects and so forth? So we've got to get to the brass tacks of any organization, any company, is that they're in business to make profit. And how they make profit nowadays is to always keep the customer happy and delighted. And always get more customers and retain your current customers, right? So the whole DevOps sales cycle is that if you do this well, it'll help you get that way, and you'll be financially successful, and you'll beat your competition. Does everyone agree with that here? There's some hype about this, you all. Okay, this is sales. But at the same time, I'm going to talk about some companies who've done this, and we've measured it to what they did before and what they're doing now, and it is significant difference. So one of the things we look at is, we kind of come in and look at where you're going at in your enterprise, and we look at network, servers, operating system, storage, deployed applications and settings. So, all of you, how many of you are working on servers and doing deployment on servers versus the cloud? Cool. What's the number one thing that kills us when we deploy things to servers? Property files. Dependencies. So we look at all this stuff and then try to determine then, for your particular company, for your particular team, what do we have to do? What are the things that are the bottlenecks? Then we talk about, systems of engagement. We talk about where your systems of record are. And then there's this whole notion, have you all heard about this notion that we have a hybrid type of deployment environment? So you'll have this whole notion that some applications you can do frequent release, and some applications you can do more rapid, and some applications you can't do fewer. So here's an example. So if I'm in an insurance company and I have a claim system, I'm not going to be updating my claim system every day. Okay, the claims adjusters would kill you. Okay, they can't absorb that much change, right? So it has to be regulated, governed, and released accordingly, right? Google, they release stuff, thousands of lines of code every hour? And how many times has your Google search engine went down? Very little, right? But at the same time, it's not as complicated. They hate me when I say this. It's not as complicated as a bank or an insurance company or everything, because you have dependencies and tons of applications you've got to interface with. So this is Amazon. Here's just some data points. I mean, you can get this from Gene Kim and Jess Humble and all this cool stuff. This is just data points that says, oops, let me go back. These people have figured out how to do it, and they're doing really well, and it's a continuous learning and continuous evolving thing. So whatever you think you're doing really well today, tomorrow you can do better. And the whole notion of machine learning and AI is probably going to come into DevOps. Think about that. So this is some great numbers that you can use if you have to get people to invest and fund your DevOps team and grow it. All right, so here's some other cool stuff. So they did a lot of research, and Gene, and this is 2014. It's even gotten more impressive today that the team now is really dependent upon the DevOps engineers. Again, more data that looks at the actual financial result of doing this well, like I indicated before. All right, so is this what you all do? Is there anyone that does anything different than this? I always ask that because I'm assuming someone is doing something different. Go ahead.
Right, so the pipeline actually could have either less.
Sorry.
So as you can see on this pipeline, there are 4 stages, so there could be more or less depending on the environment you have. Usually you have dev and prod, but you can stick as many stages in between. There's QA, there could be a pre-prod. Really depends on the company and the culture you have developed. But usually start out obviously as the dev environment and you end up as the prod environment. But in between you can have as many environments as leadership, technical leadership might see.
And how many environments do the DevOps engineers like? Like 10, 20, 3, 5?
To be honest, as little as possible.
That's good.
Because, we end up supporting them. So, yeah.
Exactly, and it costs more. So I've been to companies where I looked at all their environments, they had 10 or 12 environments, and I'm saying, dude, how much is this costing you to keep this up and running? And we look at the numbers and say, can we reduce this? And of course, now everything's moving to the cloud and you're doing virtualization, which reduces cost significantly. So now, have you heard the term shift left? Shift left everything of quality and testing. So testing now is all in the developers. So Microsoft is like moving everything to the developers' responsibility. In the old days, I shouldn't say that because I'm old. ITIL and everyone else, we had this notion that we had to have separation of concern. Testers, God forbid the developers are responsible for testing their own code. We had to have a different group to do that, right? That's changed. Now everything is pushed to the developers, the coders, and they're responsible for quality, right? And it even goes further. It goes back to the product owners and the team. They're responsible for the quality of the requirements, right? So that's the notion there. Oh, DevOps. So yeah, have you ever noticed, let me go back to this, that we keep adding stuff onto this? So it's DevOps Sec, and I've seen a Biz DevOps Sec. ING's doing Biz DevOps Sec, and I went, okay. Okay, we've been doing that for years, but I'm glad you put it all together and made an acronym out of it. So this is kind of what we look at from an SDLC. So when I get the Scrum teams together and everything, it's like who's doing what, right? And now the notion is, and how many of you have DevOps engineers on the Scrum team and not a shared team? Excellent. Most companies aren't there yet. Most companies, the DevOps group is like a shared group in the operations department, and you're going to spend 2 hours on this team, 4 hours on that team, and 2 hours on that team. And how do we know how that works? Not very well, right? So now we look at scalable DevOps, and how do we, get this organized. So CollabNet, has this pretty picture. I liked it, so I stole it. So it was the whole notion of, how do you get the teams together? How do you get the workflows together for you? In every organization, every team is different. Again, back to the old thing we looked at. What I added in here is test environment management. The DevOps generally doesn't do that. Are you all responsible for test environment management and creating test data? Who does in your organization? Who does? Developers, but should they? Look, if I'm running a big insurance company or a bank, okay, I have tons of test data. I have to create that test data for each team. Not only that, but I have to mask the PI data. So if I'm going to bring production data down and create test beds for that, I have to have a masking and tools and routines. And then you have to tell me based on the stories that you're doing in the product backlog what data you need and everything else. And I have to go before each sprint. Remember, we have to work and do the product backlog grooming and create the test data 2 to 3 sprints ahead to be a high-performing team. Who's going to do that? So let me go through this really quick. So we talked about this Scaled Agile framework. How many people know this? And Dean Leffingwell. So I love it. A few years ago, he put DevOps right there. It's important. And it's a strategic alignment, code quality. This is another way of looking at code quality and shifting left. This is the DevOps journey for IBM. IBM came up with this, of how to do this. This is Gene Kim's way of doing things. He had ways. This is the first way, so he already started down here at the environments and doing this software configuration management. Of course, they came up with mean time to repair, mean time before breaks. Do y'all do that? I mean, that's like the thing now. That's what we measure. And then the second way, where he starts going into all this work and how to do the shared and peer reviews and the governance of the code and before you push it. And then he went to the third way, which was doing the automation. Then here's the tool inventory. Everyone knows this. There's too many tools out there. Every time I turn around, there's a frickin' another tool. And these are I kind of categorize them. These are the categories I put them in. So Agile adoption and DevOps is transformation is cultural change. So you got to do change management when you introduce this stuff. Here's what I want to get to. So work with Nationwide Insurance. These are some of the results they're getting. They did this. It was hard. We had to work with, security, InfoSec. How many people work with InfoSec people? Lovely people. But they have a job to do, right? So these are great results they got. Same thing with this company and Nationwide. They got even better results after like 3 years of doing this. So it was a 3 to 5 year journey. Same thing here with Hiscox, great results. Manufacturing, and then GE Capital has done really great stuff there. So has ING, and so has Capital One. Do you believe? So this is me. You've got to believe. You've got to believe this is something that is of value and worth. And then if you believe it, then others will eventually believe it, because you're going to personify it. We do a delivery framework. We do a roadmap. We connect, this is cool, y'all. We connect this whole notion of Agile delivery and what we call product discovery and product delivery with innovation. So you still innovate where? In DevOps, you're still going to innovate in there. This is the next steps we try to go through with organizations. And that's my dog. Any questions? All right, so I went through that 1 billion miles an hour. So I'll be around if you have any questions for me, and if we want to discuss some cool stuff. Thank you very much.